What if I told you that one of the founders of Patek Philippe, yeah, the Patek Philippe, the most prestigious watch brand in the world, got pushed out in a bitter falling out 180 years ago? And that his original brand was completely forgotten for over a century. And that 10 years ago, a small team in Geneva resurrected his name and started making watches again. And most people in this hobby still have no idea who he is. That's our episode today. This is the story of Czapek, the watchmaker who founded Patek and the modern brand bringing his name back from the dead.
From pocket to wrist, the tale still lives. Tiny clocks with big time myths. Gold in the rain, steel in the flame. Every scar remembers a name. Watch stories, history on your skin.
Welcome back to What's on Your Restate. I'm Wachowski. Today we're trying again something new based on a lot of feedback from the last few episodes, and thank you genuinely for the messages. I don't say this often, it's gonna sound strange, but I am tickled. We're going to start mixing in some deeper single brand dives. Again, we're gonna call these watch stories and we'll see how they land with you. So less running through 3 brands per episode, more one brand all the way down, as much as I can give you as a history nerd doing homework, but then also having 3 small kids and helping my wife with businesses and having my own career as well. So I'm doing my best to get all of the homework done. But again, as I mess things up and if I miss a date or I goof something, give me a heads up. So I'll be looking at history, revival, models, movements, collaborations, personal stories, kind of the whole picture. And the brand, again, that I want to start with is one of my favorite brands in the entire industry, Czapek. And yes, we're going to spend a minute on the pronunciation of that because it trips up everyone. It's spelled Czapek, and the CZ is Polish, as in like in church. So it's chop and then ek. It's not Zapek, it's not Sapek, it's not Cha-pek, it's Czapek. And pronounce it once, get it right. Now I'm gonna say that, and then I created a song, but it just didn't work with it, so I kind of fiddled with it too. But you're gonna have to give me some creative liberties here, folks. Sometimes things don't rhyme the way that they should, and sometimes choruses hit better. When I can mess with the language a little bit. I'm not Eminem. I do the best I can. So this is going to be a longer form episode. Pour something, settle in. Unless you're driving. If you're driving, then don't pour something. Just grab a snack, but don't be drinking while you're driving. We've got history to cover. Let's get into it. All right, segment 1, 1893, the first founding. To understand why Czapek matters, you have to go back to 1839 to Geneva and a Polish watchmaker named Francois Czapek. Francois was born in 1811 and in what was then partitioned Poland, and a lot of educated Poles of his era and his generation, they ended up exiled after November and this uprising of 1830 and a failed Polish rebellion against Russian rule. And so many of those exiles, they fled west into Switzerland and to France. So Francois ended up in Geneva, which ironically was the watchmaking capital of the world at that time. Now, he was, by all accounts, an extraordinarily talented watchmaker. Hand-finished pocket watches, beautifully engraved cases, complicated movements. He was already known for his work when, in May of 1839, he founded a watchmaking partnership with another Polish exile, a businessman named Antoni Patek. And Antoni was spelled Antoni. Patek, obviously, is Patek. So the company was called Patek, Czapek et C. And when you see it pronounced, it's actually, the letters are ET and it looks like et, but it's actually A, like AY. And then C is CIE, but it's pronounced, it's SEE, and that just basically means, and company, right? So for 6 years, that was the brand. The 2 co-founders, Patek handled the business and the sales, and Czapek handled the watchmaking. And together they built one of the most prestigious early watchmaking manufacturers in Geneva. And they had clients that were including royalty from Europe and Russian aristocrats. And don't get into the politics about, selling watches to folks that had exiled you. We're not going to get into that part. But for 6 years, Czapek's name was on the dial side of Patek's. And then in 1845, things fell apart. All right, so segment 2, the feud and how Patek became Patek. And so this is kind of, for me, the kind of the spicier part of it, the real life drama. So the exact reason for the split are debated. This is debated by horological historians to this day. And we're going to do maybe a full episode that goes deeper into early Geneva and watchmaking drama, because trust me, there is so much to kind of uncover. And I felt like as I was peeling back the onion to do the homework for this episode, my goodness, I could have gone a million different directions. But again, these things cannot be 15 hours long. So broad strokes are going to be 1844, partnership was not working. Patek had ambitions. Czapek didn't see them, right? Remember, Czapek is he's a watchmaker. He's taking his time to do individual craft, and he's not a business person. Sounds like a lot of these folks that we know in this industry now, right? You have folks that are beautiful watchmakers. They're typically reserved. They have the watchmaking first, and there's kind of this ethical, moral compass that they kind of are accompanied by, and then they don't have the business side, and so sometimes they partner together, and the business side works. But there's almost this sort of ebb and flow. There's a push and a pull, and Patek had these ambitions that Czapek did not share. And so Patek had met a young French watchmaker named Philippe. It's Adrien. It looks like Adrian, but it's Adrien. Or I think they would pronounce it I'm going to go through and try to get it correct, which is Adrien Philippe. And so he found this person at a Paris industrial exhibition where Philippe had just won. And so he was a legit watchmaker. He won a gold medal for inventing something that we all know and kind of forget about now. He invented the keyless works, the winding system. And so the keyless winding system, before this, when you had to wind a watch, you had to have a separate key to wind your watch. And so now what he had invented was that you could use your crown versus a separate key. And this was a technological revolution of the era. And so Patek saw it, Patek wanted it, and Patek wanted to bring Philippe into the company. Now, this sounds a lot like other brands that we've discussed, right? This sounds a lot like Rolex, where they would go and they would see patents, or they would see manufacturers, and they would go, instead of inventing, they would just acquire, right? And so Francois Czapek, for reasons that historians can still argue about, he wasn't on board. And so there were disagreements about money, there were disagreements about direction and who should lead. And in 1845, the partnership dissolved, and Patek brought in Philippe, and the brand was renamed Patek Philippe et Cie, right? NC. And Czapek was out. And he didn't disappear. He kept making watches under his own name. So you would see Czapek and C. And he was actually pretty successful. He opened a boutique in Geneva, and then another in Warsaw. And then in, I think, 1854, he actually opened one on the most prestigious storefronts of all. If you look at like 25 Place, and then I think I'm going to mess up all of my French here, but Place Vendôme, right? If you, he was okay. My French is horrible. I'm sorry. I do my best. I try my best, but I'm pretty useless. So in Paris, and that address actually became the most famous luxury address in the world. And so Czapek actually had it before most of the brands that you'd associate with that location would. And so his clients, no joke, were like Napoleon III. He appointed him as actually his official watchmaker to the imperial household. So his pocket watches, they won prizes at world fairs. He published these documents on watchmaking, and he was at the time he was a peer of Patek and Philippe, and he wasn't their forgotten partner. Okay, so as we kind of go through, this is going to make more sense, I hope. Okay, so now he's not a forgotten partner. He was considered a peer. And then here's the thing about history: Patek had Philippe. Patek had this keyless winding patent. Patek had a better business operation, and over the next century and a half, Patek Philippe became Patek Philippe, the apex of hot horology, the brand whose watches your grandfather supposedly didn't own but merely looked after for the next generation. And Czapek's company kept going for about 30 years after Francois died in 1869. It eventually went dormant, the boutiques closed, the name kind of slipped out of public memory. And by the 20th century, Czapek had a brand essentially that didn't exist. And the watchmaker who had co-founded what would become the most famous name in horology was forgotten by everyone except a handful of vintage pocket watch collectors who happened to come across old Czapek signed pieces in these like auction lots. So 146 years. Czapek was effectively dead. And then that was until 2015. All right, so it's 2015, we're going to get into segment 3, which is the resurrection. In 2015, 3 watch industry veterans. So you're going to have Xavier, you're going to have this gentleman who is now the brand's CEO, along with Sebastian and Harry. And these 3 folks made quite the extraordinary decision. Together, they were going to bring back CHAP-eck. And not as like a tribute, right? They were going to do like an homage or a tribute band, right? Not as like a vintage homage type thing where, they're going to make watches that look like they were from the 1850s and, no. They wanted a living, working, modern manufacturer using Francois Czapek's name, but honoring the history and that made these watches amazing, but then also were built for the 21st century, as if Francois never left. And the way they funded it was nuts. Frankly, it's beautiful. It's insane, but it's beautiful. Instead of going to private equity or a luxury conglomerate, they did something crazy. They went and tried to crowdfund it. They did share offerings. They invited people who loved the story to literally buy in and become co-owners of the new brand. Hundreds of collectors and enthusiasts across the world ended up as small shareholders of the new Czapek. And Czapek is, to this day, owned in part by people who care about watchmaking, not some financial holding company. And that partnership is part of why I think Czapek does what Czapek does. They answer to people who love watches, not to quarterly earnings call. And in that respect, they are much more in line with the brand of like Rolex. However, they're much more transparent. They are kind of an open book in regard to what's coming. And then they listen and they iterate. So I'll give some examples of that in a little bit. The brand's headquarters are in Geneva, and they're explicitly positioning themselves as kind of continuing Francois' legacy. They're using his name, they're referencing his ideas, even drawings on his Polish heritage in some of the model names. The very first modern Czapeks were called the Quai de Berg, and they and it's sounds like Quai de Berg, but it's spelled Quai and then space DES space BERGUES. I knew this episode was going to be hard for me. And so they named this after the Geneva street where Francois had his original boutique, which is, I mean, if you're just, again, as a history person, you're like, man, there's so much consideration in the way that they're doing this, right? And then there's their chronograph line, which you're going to see is the Faubourg du Cracovie. I hope it's French for, it looks like Krakow suburb, right? It's a direct nod to Francois' Polish roots. And so again, it's a tip of the hat back, right? And again, I'm going to try to pronounce some of these words, but again, you see I'm struggling here. Now, that's the kind of brand Czapek is. Every detail is going to have a story. Every model name is this love letter to history. And I think for me, that's fascinating. So segment 4, let's talk about what makes Czapek a Czapek. Now let's talk about the watches themselves, because Czapek has done something in 10 years since the revival that I think is genuinely impressive. The brand has a few core lines, right? They have their chronograph. They have something that's very classical as well, right? They have this the Quai de Berg, and it's kind of their more classical, kind of dressy, beautifully proportioned 3-hand watch. It's kind of in the spirit of what Francois' 19th century pocket watches would have looked like. Hand finished, beautiful guilloche dials, often with a small seconds at 6. Sometimes they'll offset them in a different location. And this is Czapek doing what classical watchmaking is in the way that it's meant to be done. Then they have their chronograph, right? The Faubourg du Cracovie. How'd I do? I don't know. It's okay. It's a love language, and I don't speak love language. Now, a mono pusher, their chronograph was manufactured in collaboration with Vaucher, and it has this dial layout and finishing that puts it firmly in hot horology territory. And then there's this line for me and a lot of modern collectors that is Czapek today. It's the Antarctique. And again, Antarctique is the one that you're probably going to know the most. It's ANTARCTIQUE, Antarctique. Now, it was launched in 2020, and it was a banger, home run. Launched in 2020, the Antarctique was Czapek's first integrated bracelet luxury sports watch, and it landed in the middle of kind of this integrated bracelet boom. Royal Oaks were unattainable. Nautilus was unattainable. Everyone was looking for a serious sports watch with kind of like serious in-house movement, serious finishing, but that looked something that was different. Not too different, but different. And most of the options were either a 10-year waitlist, 6-figure aftermarket prices, or something ridiculous. And Antarctique walked into this vacuum quietly without hype. They didn't have like this celebrity ambassador. and they dominated the conversation for people who knew. The 40.5 millimeter case, the integrated bracelet, these polished C-shaped links, yes, C as in like for Czapek. The textured dials that they had, they were often registered with this kind of pattern called the Stairway to Eternity. Metalem was making those dials for them, and critically, the in-house caliber, the SXH5, was bonkers to look at. So I'm going to spend a minute on that movement because it deserves it. And if you've seen these movements, if you've seen them in person, they're nuts. The SXH5 is Czapek's first fully in-house automatic. It's a 30 millimeter in diameter, the movement itself. It's 42 millimeters across these bridges. It has, and this is kind of crazy when you start to look at the way that this thing is kind of designed, right? The case itself, I would say, you're a 40 and a half millimeter. You've got this kind of movement shape that's filling this case. It's got a 4 hertz beat rate. It's a 60-hour power reserve, and it has this off-center micro rotor. Again, you know what the micro rotors look like. They're off-centered so that you get this look of the entire movement, which is stunning. Has a recycled platinum rotor. It lets you see again the entire movement, the skeletonized case back, and it has this is the part that's kind of catches people off guard. Has 7 skeletonized bridges in an architecture that's kind of inspired by 19th century Czapek pocket watches, but they look like finger bridges. And so instead of having this big plate that covers all of the movement, you literally have just enough material to hold these bridges in place. And it's something to kind of see in person. Now, they also do things that are crazy. They have these variable inertia balances. They have 4 gold inertia blocks that are in there that are each one of them is adjustable. You have hand beveled inward angles, and that's absolute hot horology. That's a tell because inward angles can only be polished by hand. Machines literally cannot make those inward angles. So you know that someone had that piece and was hand polishing them, typically with a small wooden dowel and polishing them. Now, if you look through the case back of an Antarctique, and you're going to be looking at real watchmaking. Not a movement that was bought by a supplier and rebadged, not a tweaked ETA. An honest to God, in-house manufacturer caliber, hand finished to a level that competes with watches that are costing 3 to 5 times the price. That is what Czapek is. A real watchmaker at prices that, by hot horology standards, it sounds ridiculous, they're reasonable. Antarctique on steel start in the low 20,000 range, and they go up from there for limited editions and precious metal pieces. They come down a little bit, and they've started to get a little bit hotter, but you used to be able to pick them up for $15,000, $16,000, somewhere in that range, and now even the pre-owned ones are kind of coming up, and now all of a sudden, new ones are up into the 30s. They're getting expensive because people are kind of starting to figure this out. Now, segment 5, iteration and how Czapek actually listens. This is crazy as well. So here's something about Czapek that I think everyone that's listening, I want you to internalize, because it's one of the things that makes them different from almost any other brand at this price point. Czapek iterates based on customer feedback, like actual feedback from actual customers. And this sounds like a smart marketing line. It's not. I'm going to give you concrete examples of what they're doing here. The original Antarctique launched with kind of this one integrated bracelet design. Customers said, dude, we want bracelet. It's integrated and that's cool, has a butterfly clasp, but micro adjustment would be cool. And so Czapek went back, they re-engineered the bracelet, and they improved it with a micro adjustment system on both sides, and then they just rolled it forward on all of the subsequent Antarctique models. They didn't have some massive press release. They just rolled it out and they offered it to people. Now, the original Antarctique cases were stainless steel and they were rose gold, and customers said that they wanted a titanium for everyday wear. And guess what Czapek did? They developed titanium versions. Then the original Antarctique was 40.5 millimeters, and it wears low. It's slammed down. It's really flat and wears really comfortable. But then customers were like, well, I have a smaller wrist, and the 40.5 is really pushing the limits of my comfort. And so guess what they did? They wanted a more compact option. So Czapek, they re-engineered and they came up with the Antarctique S, and they came up with a 38.5 millimeter. Texture dials, they had strap options, they had ease of release systems, and they continued to iterate. And so the back case of this is an example of all of those iterations. Czapek has been shaped in many ways by what owners and these prospective owners have said to the brand. Now, this is interesting because even if you've gotten rubber straps from them, if you get newer ones, for example, they had a tool where you could click and slowly turn, 180 degrees, and you could pop the bracelet off with a tool. And now the rubber straps, you have a little push button, you can pop them out. And again, small iterations, right? They wanted a brushed bracelet as opposed to having polished center links. And so they've given you that option. They had the bracelet that had small pins And they were like, we would like screws. And so just small iterations that they've listened to their customers over time and made, these changes. Now, why does Czapek do this? They do it because they can, because they're small enough that the CEO answers his own emails, because they aren't owned by a luxury conglomerate that needs design decisions to be approved by a marketing team in Paris, because they choose these things. When they brought the brand back in 2015 to be this kind of company, they had planned for this kind of company, a company that listens to its audience, a brand that builds watches for actual people. Now compare this to conglomerate-owned brand. Take any major brand under a luxury group umbrella. Say a customer writes them a polite email with a thoughtful design suggestion. That email's not going to get answered, not in a meaningful way. You might get like an automated reply, an automated thank you, but the brand's design pipeline, they're set 3 to 5 years in advance by people in corporate offices. This is kind of insane. And so what we're going to see here is something different. When a customer writes to them, they might actually get a response. And again, this is your individual feedback. And I think in the kindest terms possible, when we're responding or sending emails to big brands, they don't care. Czapek cares. Czapek is literally the opposite of what those conglomerates look like. So this next segment is going to be a personal story for me that I think perfectly captures that. So let's talk about the collaborations. We're going to talk about Oster, and we're going to talk about collective horology. Oster is a jewelry. They're an authorized dealer of Czapek. They're a jewelry store. They sell watches, jewelry, all that kind of stuff, right? But they're an AD. And then collective horology is more of an independent watch dealer. Both of them awesome dudes, by the way. So first, we're going to talk about the Antarctique Passage de Drake / or X or collaborated with Oster. So Oster Jewelers, they're in Denver, and they did this partnership with Czapek that's interesting. It's a fascinating watch. They limited it to 20 pieces, just 20. And this was this opportunity that this watch was going to feature. Typically, they have these ice white dials, and they have, again, the Stairway to Eternity texture. They have blued steel hands. This one had blued steel markers, and then they had this, luminescent Arabic 12 at the top. And again, blued second hands. There was this, they replaced this red tipped one, and the watch came on this steel bracelet, but it also came with an additional rubber strap, and you got the choice of what color you wanted. And the execution for me was extraordinary. And then there's an Easter egg on the watches as well. There's an Easter egg on the 20th. The date is red as opposed to just the standard date wheel that they have. And I think it's fascinating because what Oster did was they took this regular, what was the standard kind of ice white, and they grayed the dial out. And it was so far ahead of what was coming out. And now there's a lot of folks that are kind of copying kind of the dial layout, that gray with these blued hands and indices. If you look at like Traska, for example, they had dropped one of their commuters looked very, very similar to that. And again, you can see what Christopher Ward and stuff has done as well. But Oster was ahead of that. And so it was just really interesting to see Jeremy Oster's idea of what they collaborated with this 20-piece limited run. And so again, what makes the collaboration interesting is who Oster is. Oster Jewelers is a small family-run boutique in Denver. They've been, over the last decade or so, they've become, to me, one of the most influential independent watch dealers and retailers in America. Jeremy Oster, he literally cares about independent watchmaking. And the fact that Czapek partnered with him for a 20-piece run says something about how Czapek thinks about the watch retail world, and that the fact that they're partnering with people who care, not just like the biggest distributors. And so for me, that's a really big deal. And I think personally, I think that Czapek, the Oster, Oster, that collaboration is one of the prettiest. It's one of the prettiest Antarctiques that they make that was available. Now that's also up there with what I would consider one of the most beautiful and one of the coolest stories of the Antarctiques, which is how they did this P04 Lanakai limited edition with Collective Horology. So Collective Horology, they're California-based independent watch dealer. Asher and Gabe run that shop. They're super good dudes. They are awesome to work with, and they have a great website. And they also have a great podcast. So check out their website. If you haven't listened to their podcast specifically, they are awesome dudes. You can check out the podcast. Is called Open Work. It's a good podcast. They're super sharp dudes. They know what they're talking about. And the fact that they talk about independent watches, if you're in this space and you've enjoyed anything about my podcast, go to them too, because they're way more professional than I am. Now, again, when we talk about Asher and Gabe, their brands themselves and the brands that they hold, I think they've absolutely outdone themselves with the collaborations and the releases that they've had. They've partnered with Moser and Zenith and IWC, but then also with like Urwerk and Jan Shapiro and Armin Strom. So I mean, they're not like entry level dudes. These dudes know what they're doing. So the Lanikai was their fourth collaboration. That's why they call it the P04. The P stands for Portfolio Piece Number 4, and it's named after Lanikai Beach in Hawaii. And the co-founder Gabe, he studied, I believe, at the University of Hawaii, and so he proposed the idea to CHAP-eck with some pictures that he'd taken of the beach. And so what followed was, and I'm not exaggerating, literally 3 years of development. Now, this is in the boom of when CHAP-eck was making Antarctiques, and the Antarctique was a home run. And CHAP-eck could have easily punted on the project and said, "Look, we got so many orders, we have all this stuff that we have to do, and we're just gonna have to put you guys on pause." But they shook hands on it. This was an agreement, right? And CHAP-eck honored it, and so they partnered with this legendary enamel dial maker. And it's hard to put into words how significant this is. But Donze Kaidran, he's based in Lalac, and Donze, by the way, he's the same enameler that supplies dials to Patek and Cartier and for their highest end pieces. So Donze was acquired by Ulysses Nardin in 2012, and they still make Grand Fou dial enamel dials for like the very top of the industry. And so CHAP-eck had Donze take this polished gold dial blank and then press it into kind of a concave shape, and then hand engrave a wave pattern of this like irregular kind of grain texture onto a surface, and then apply this tortoise enamel color over the entire thing in such a way that the deeper grooves of the engraving collected more enamel. So as they threw the enamel on there, think about when you have this sandy beach and it kind of makes these ripples, right? Or if you see like the sand at a desert, for example, and had these ripples from the wind, it was nuts. And so they created these like this natural shadows and gradients that mimic the way that light plays on these shallow Hawaiian waters. And the first attempts, and this is in CHAP-eck's CEO's own words, he said that they were a full-blown disaster. It took years of them trial and error to perfect this dial. And they had to source a very specific enamel powder that had the exact turquoise blue, that had this Lanikai coloring to itself. And then they had a hand engraver, Michelle, had to develop a completely new technique to capture these irregularities of the underwater dunes. So every dial that they have is unique because the firing process introduces all these tiny natural variations. Now, the watch itself was limited to 50 pieces, so there's more of those, and they were around 26. They were expensive. Let's just say that they were pricey. Okay, they were They were $26,500. That's a lot of money. I was trying to hold it back, but I'm just gonna say. So they were $26,500. They were available through exclusively through Collective Horology, and by every account from people who've handled them, and I've never seen one in person, and this is the part that hurts me real bad. They argue that it's one of the most beautiful enamel dials that they've seen in the last decade. Other people that have had and are kind of more in the space of enamel dials say it's the best enamel dial they have ever seen. And that again is what CHAP-eck does. It's a level of craft, it's that partnership, it's the fact that they didn't give up on the project. Three years, folks, 3 years that they worked on this specific dial because they had an idea of what they wanted, and then they made it happen, right? And again, this is what you get. It's the kind of patience that to get something right, to get it right before it ships. They're not ordinary watch collaborations. These are art projects. And the brand, despite making them in kind of tiny numbers at fairly serious prices, I think that they're small enough and humble enough to do with them what people actually care about. And so to me, again, fascinating stuff. So now let's talk about this next section. I want to tell you about this personal story that CHAP-eck has for me, and it says everything about why I love this brand, okay? So a while back, my 6-year-old, he's getting into watches, and he's got a Shure SHER watch, so shout out to those guys as well, just because my son loves your watch and swims with it and beats the life out of it, and it's still ticking. I'm going to tell you a story for CHAP-eck that kind of says everything about why I adore these folks. A while back, my 6-year-old again got into watches, which given that I'm in this space, probably is kind of inevitable, but you never know. Kids will revolt against their parents. We were looking at watches together, and we have, the magazines and stuff, and he's flipping through, and we got on the topic of what CHAP-eck makes, but then also what they don't make. And specifically, CHAP-eck doesn't currently have, as of this recording, a dive watch. The Antarctique is a sporty, water resistant, beautifully made watch, but it's not a true diver. It still has, 120 meters, 12 bar water resistance rating, but it doesn't have a unidirectional bezel. uh, And it has a water rating, but not like a serious one. It's not at 200 or 300 meters, right? So it's not a watch that a dive watch person would say that that's a dive watch. And so again, this is me quoting my 6-year-old and what he said to me, which is, why don't they just make one? Which again, as a 6-year-old question, is a fantastic question because the answer is, well, they could, they just haven't, right? And they have a pipeline of other projects, I'm sure, whatever. So we did what any reasonable father and 6-year-old son would do. We took out a piece of paper and we started sketching what a Czapek diver might look like. And we landed on this kind of dual crown design. And the reason he likes the dual crown is I used to have one of the watches that was stolen was a Longines Legend diver, and he and my middle daughter loved moving the crown around in regard to the moving the internal rotating bezel. It's just like so smooth. They loved playing with that. And so we started sketching these Czapek divers again, but he landed on this idea of having a dual crown, one crown to set the time, one crown to operate the internal rotating bezel, a super compressor kind of style layout, but probably not a super compressor in the traditional sense. We thought about how the case would carry over for Czapek's signature like C shapes. And so we thought about what the integrated bracelet would look like, and it wouldn't be a bracelet, it would be probably like a textile strap. So we mocked up where the indices would go, how the loom might work, and what the bezel scale would say. And so my 6-year-old wanted little, things on the bezel, and he lobbied for, traditional dive markers, and we compromised on what they might look like. And then we took out a picture of the sketch, and we kind of half jokingly turned it into a digital rendering. And then we did what insane people do, and we just emailed it to Czapek. And I want you to understand what I expected to happen, which was I expected nothing to happen. I expected silence. I expected at best a polite auto response, maybe if I was lucky, a thank you for your interest from someone in their customer service department, right? That was, just learning how to file papers. And what I actually got was that they wrote back. Czapek wrote back. They engaged the idea. They looked at the sketch, the digital rendering, and they had an actual conversation with us about it and made some jokes about a future watch designer with my 6-year-old. I don't want to get into the specifics of what they said because that's kind of between my son and them. But the fact that they wrote us back and they took the time and they treated a 6-year-old's idea, design, as a real idea that was worth something. That for me is the entire story of Czapek. It's not a single anecdote. It is their brand. And so try doing that with a luxury conglomerate. Try emailing the design team of any Swiss watch group with your sketch that your kid drew and see what happens. You'll hear back nothing. Forever. Your email will not even be processed by a human being, is my guess. Czapek, the brand whose name was forgotten for over 146 years, the brand resurrected by people who explicitly chose to be small and to listen, Czapek wrote back to a 6-year-old. That is the difference between an independent and a conglomerate. That is why you are buying or at least liking or enjoying or appreciating or I don't also want to say envying, but just looking up to brands like Czapek. It's if you are in the, the 90s and you have a Ferrari on your wall, right? Czapek is the Ferrari on the wall now. They're the brand that I think, yeah, there's these hype brands and all that kind of stuff, but Czapek is the brand that I think is the most real. And I think there's a value to that. And so when a 6-year-old asks them for gives them a thoughtful question about their work, they answered it. And I think that's so rare. And I think that should be valued. And so segment 8, why Czapek matters. So here's kind of the thesis of the episode. Why did I want to spend an entire show on Czapek? Well, one, because you asked me to, but two, because Czapek to me is the single best argument for why independent watchmaking matters in 2026 and beyond. You can buy a Patek Nautilus. It'll be a great watch. You'll probably wait 3 years for it. You'll pay an enormous premium over retail if you don't get it at retail. And you'll own a watch made by a company that is frankly one of the great watchmaking institutions of all time. But a company so large and so demanded of that it cannot, by definition, be intimate with its customers. You can buy an AP Royal Oak, same story. Or you can explore and possibly buy a Czapek Antarctique. You will probably get it within a few months or a few years, depending on what you're looking for. You may find one on the secondary market at a discount, and you'll pay close to retail or maybe a little bit less. And there's no waitlist drama. There's stories of the orders of Czapek, and what they mean by that is the order book is the order book. So if you place an order you're in the queue. It's not like a Rolex wait list and you don't know where you are in the queue. It's you place an order, and then if they're 2 years out, then in 2 years you get your watch. If it's a 12-month wait, in 12 months you get your watch. There is no jumping the line. So when the CEO, for example, puts his name on the list, he is in line with you to get his watch. He doesn't get to jump the line because he's the CEO of the company. His name goes on the list with you, with anyone else, and then you are in queue to get your watch. And so I think for me, that's fascinating as well, because what you're getting is this watch that's mechanically, aesthetically in the same conversation as these high end watches. And the story behind it, in my opinion, is better. The relationship you have with the brand is fundamentally better. And the watch on your wrist will be considered by the right people, I think, to the people who actually know and not by anyone else, which is exactly how, for me, I want it. CHAP-eck is not the cheapest path to hot horology. I don't claim that they are. But I think if you're looking at grail pieces, and some people are spending $15,000 or $20,000 on a Rolex, $15,000 for a CHAP-eck, in my opinion, is so much more of a play for your own heart, not for the envy of other people that you don't know. It is, I think, in every sense that matters, one of the most honest paths you can take in this space. And in a hobby where it's increasingly dominated by hype and wait lists and speculation, honest is kind of what I'm looking for nowadays. All right, so segment 9, we're going to talk about what's next. I hope that this CHAP-eck episode was interesting to you. We'll see. I guess we'll get some feedback on it. So next episode, we're going to do another deep dive in a single brand, and we're going to do something very different. We're going to go to Kalba. And you're like, what? It's a small town in central Germany, Saxony, that almost nobody outside of Germany has heard of. And in that small town, there's a workshop. It's run by a father and son. And there's a brand that I think that it's one of the most quietly extraordinary in the entire world of hot horology. Dornbluth and Son. Now you're going to hear it say it's Dornbluth, Dornbluth, and it's actually pronounced Dornblut und Son. Most people will say Dornbluth and Son, and that's how we're going to say it for me because, it's my podcast. If CHAP-eck is an independent watchmaker with this charisma and storytelling and kind of gravitas and a charming, kind of exuberant, just full of joy life CEO and owner, I think Dornbluth is the independent watchmaker that's doing that kind of same stuff, but in silence. No marketing team, like almost no Instagram presence, almost no broader awareness, and yet they make movements by hand with a level of finishing that would embarrass brands 10 times their size. We're going to talk about the father, Dieter, and their son, Dirk. It's D-I-R-K, but it's actually pronounced, I believe, Dirk. Their movements, including the legendary 99 caliber series, these just beautiful dials, German watchmaking, and this tradition that runs through Glashütte and Dornbluth, and how they're carrying that forward in their own kind of quiet way, and why you've never heard of Dornbluth before, and why you probably should know that they exist. So that's going to be coming up, I guess, next. So that's episode 8 of What's on Your Wrist Day. Quick favor, if you found this episode useful, if the CHAP-eck story landed, any parts of it, send it to one of your friends that needs to hear it, especially if your friend's sitting on a Submariner wait list and they don't know the whole story of independent watchmaking and that they could be exploring something different. If you've got a CHAP-eck and you just want to show me yours, that'd be rad because I like to see them. That'd be cool. Or if you are looking for an online retailer that might be able to source you one, reach out. Tell me which models that speak to you. Tell me your stories or your brands or anything else or things that I messed up, or, shoot me a voicemail that says, hey, this is how you properly pronounce that French word, you dum-dum. To Xavier and to the entire CHAP-eck team, thank you for the email. Thank you for the kind words to my son. My kid says hi, and the sketches and the digital renderings are still on our fridge. So I'm Wachowski. Take care of yourselves and wear something good.
Fire, old brass bones, new blood desire. Czapek on the dial, old name, fresh heat. Lost for a while, now back on its feet. You can hear it coming under the skin. A little bit dangerous, let the story begin. Czapek, bracelet got the seeds. Czapek, come back, please. Welcome back, we missed you bad. Sharp as a blade and twice as mad. Czapek, you still got that spark. Czapek, we missed you bad. Sharp as a blade and twice as mad. CHAP-eck, CHAP-eck, you still got that spark. CHAP-eck, CHAP-eck, cut right through the dark. They tried to leave you out of the frame, but legends don't die, they just change their name. Now every wrist knows what the mark can mean. A little bit classic, a little obscene. CHAP-eck, CHAP-eck, bracelet got the C's. CHAP-eck, CHAP-eck, come back, please. Welcome back, we missed you bad. Sharp as a blade and twice as mad. CHAP-eck, CHAP-eck, you still got that spark. CHAP-eck, CHAP-eck, cut right through the dark. From pocket to wrist, the tale still lives. Tiny clocks with big time myths. Gold in the rain, steel in the flame. Every scar remembers a name. Watch stories, watch stories. History on your skin. Watch stories, watch stories. Drama spun within. Little wheels, big stories. Ticking through the years. Watch stories, watch stories. Turn the page, come near. A king, a thief, a sailor's ring, a midnight deal, a wedding thing. Passed hand to hand across the land. Now every face leaves a mark in the band. Watch stories, watch stories. History on your skin. Watch stories, watch stories. Drama spun within. Little wheels, big stories. Ticking through the years. Watch stories, watch stories. Turn the page, come near. Old hands, new hands, one small frame. Different lives, same heartbeat game. Tell me more, open that door. I want the next story encore. Watch stories, watch stories. History on your skin. Watch stories, watch stories. Drama spun within. Little wheels,